So for me, like every one of my books has been a fight with the publisher about the title. And like one of my solutions, so my publisher wanted my book, The Obstacle is the Way, they wanted to just title The Way. And actually my US and my UK publisher were in complete agreement on this fact. So I actually got them both. I got The Obstacle is the Way and Ego is the Enemy tattooed on my arm just to end it's already been etched into my skin. There's no debate over this. And then there was should we call it The Ego is the Enemy? And it's like, nope, there's no the in the tattoo. This is done.
And that's the philosophy that won them over.
Well, yes. Ryan, there's no debate.
They had this.
I can't undo the tattoo.
Ryan made it on his tattoo. We have to name it this.
Exactly. No, so they were like, I remember there was an email and my editor was like, is it the, and we were going back and forth, or she was going back and forth. And then I just sent her a picture of the tattoo and I didn't say anything else. And that was the end of the discussion.
Well, it's interesting because you really, we were talking about this a little earlier. You really, like my advice, I gave you advice around 2012 or 2013, which was specifically bad advice that you ignored. And I said to you, look, you have so many skills in marketing and you seem to be in such demand for marketing. You could stay in New York City, create a little marketing agency, build it up for 2 or 3 years, sell it for 10 million, which is like a standard path for marketing agencies, particularly for someone with your background at that time and the demand you had and so on. And I know that strategy would have worked. I'm sure you thought that strategy would have worked, but it didn't matter to you. You didn't give a shit. And you moved to Austin and just became a writer, which is what you wanted to do.
But I did listen to you at first, and I did move here.
And you were miserable.
This is the worst city in America. I hate New York.
I disagree, but...
No, it was like, first off, okay, so if pursuing this thing is going to potentially make me a bunch of money, and the first thing I'm going to do with that money is go move somewhere else, why not just skip straight to that step? You know what I mean? Like, it seems like, okay, so I have to live here for a number of years where I'm not happy, where everything is really expensive and the weather sucks and still tons of traffic, like all the things that I dislike about New York. And then, so I would make a ton of money so then I could afford a place in Austin. I can already afford a place in Austin. Anyone can, right? It's Texas. And so I just moved there. And I decided that I would start a company, but the idea of the company wouldn't be, I'm going to go work on a bunch of things that I'm not proud of and work for a bunch of clients who I don't like to, again, make a lot of money to sell a company to some bigger company, which I then have to work. Like, the other interesting thing about so much of entrepreneurship is like people start their own company because they want to be their own boss. And then the exit strategy is you sell to another company, which you then have to go work at for an extended period of time. So the success is that you end up doing the one thing that you specifically did not want to do. And so I just hated all of that. And so I said, well, why don't I just start a company where I only work on things that I like? I'm not going to take on a ton of overhead or hire a bunch of people or just sort of like why should I get a lease on a building that costs me X amount per year and then I have to go out and get X number of clients to pay for that building? Why don't I just not have the building and then I'll only work on stuff that I want to do? And that's sort of what I've tried to build. And like, yeah, again, like if I had a company that had investors that had this thing, I couldn't buy a ghost town or I couldn't get up and move or, I couldn't do what I wanted. And so to me, the whole point, and obviously Tim Ferriss has written about this very compellingly, but the whole point of wealth and success is supposed to be independence and freedom. And ironically, so many of the things that we want to do don't give us those things. And then this goes to Seneca's idea. Well, what if it takes 5 years and you'll sell this company for $10 million? But what if you die in year 3? Like, your plan didn't fucking work.
Right.
So that was the idea.
So you moved to Austin. You started writing these incredible books like Obstacles the Way, Ego is the Enemy, Perennial Seller, Conspiracy, which was a new direction for your writing. What's next on the writing?
More books, trying to take more time. I mean, one of the things that I did basically a book a year for 6 or 7 years, maybe even, actually the math is more than that. I've written 8 books. And my first book came out in 2012. So that's like a lot very quickly. And so I'm trying, I think one of the other things that I've been thinking a lot about is sort of sustainability. Like how can, like, I don't want to be a writer for 6 years. I want to be a writer for 60 years. So how do I sort of take care of myself, sort of space things out, how do I build a more sort of sustainable, enduring career? So I've been trying to sort of slow down and think bigger and work smarter and that sort of thing.
So what way? Because it's very interesting because I feel like the media, obviously the media landscape has changed a lot, but it changes at a really fast pace now.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, nobody really gets their start now as a blogger.
Right.
Like that phenomenon of blogger to book to success doesn't exist. And it's starting to not exist. Even YouTube to media star to TV show, that is starting to no longer exist. So media is turning like upside down in a weird way. Like Tim Ferriss, Tucker, you, even me, we all kind of started off blogging, and we don't do that, or we do it, but
here's what's
people
interesting.
Don't get their start that way anymore.
But now we don't blog. We write long form articles, oftentimes for like serious publications, which is how writing was done before blogging was invented. Mm. So I think at the end of the day, everything sort of regresses back towards it's like, okay, the new invention is sort of cord cutting, right? So everything's on streaming platforms. And what do you know? Shows are still about 30 minutes or an hour. And then they come in seasons. Like, none of this needs to be this way, but we sort of revert back to some sort of common form in whatever we're doing. So yeah, so YouTube is hot for a while, or Vine is hot for a while, or podcasts are hot for a while. And at the end of the day, the audience attention span is about the same, and people just want good shit, period. And so I think people can often be too obsessed or focused on like what the hot thing is right now, rather than focusing on like what's good and enduring. You know what I mean? So it's,
but you just mentioned how like last year was the first year you hadn't written a book. You'd written a book a year up until...
I mean, I had a book come out last year, and then I had a book come out this year. So at the end of the day, people are still like, books are the only I think I saw this on Reddit today, so it could be totally made up. But books are the only growing physical medium, the only the physical product that's showing growth, right? So like books, people still read books. I mean, if anything, we're living in a golden age of books. Not only do we have growth in the physical form, and now we have ebooks, which is a new category, but audiobooks are blowing up. So
right.
what I'm thinking about more is like, how can I just continue to make really great stuff that people like, and then be somewhat medium agnostic, right? Like, and how can I own my relationship with the fans as much as possible? That's what I think about.
I mean, I think about this a lot because like last year for me, so I've written a book a year since 2003, and or sometimes more than one book in a year, until 2017 was the first year I did not even write a book, let alone publish a book. And
happiest year of your life? Happiest year of your life?
Probably. It's when I started doing more of this more obsessively, and I started doing a lot more podcasting and other things, and playing around with other media and learning other skills. But I don't know. What do you think? What do you think I should do? You help me with Choose Yourself. Now help me out.
I mean, 5 years later, I would be like, Choose Yourself, and then you've done a number of books since then, but Choose Yourself stands sort of head and shoulders above all the others. I think you spent the most time with it. It was the most sort of singularly unique idea. And the other books have sort of been not sequels, but sort of supplementary content. If I were you, I would think like, I would be swinging for a home run. Like, what's a big, new, different idea that you could do? That's what I would be thinking.
So it's kind of like what you did with Conspiracy. So you've written these books that are very conceptual, like Obstacles the Way is about how, obstacles can be the way. Ego is the enemy. It's this concept about...
By the way, for people who are thinking about doing books, you want a book that is self-evident and simple. Like Choose Yourself. What's that about? I don't know. Of course you know what it's about, right? The obstacle is the way. You get it from the title, and then everything else is confirmation of that idea. But when you can really nail something, like my books that have worked really well, nail that. My books that have worked okay haven't nailed it as well.
Well, the titles work if somebody says that phrase, I think of your book.
Or they have a strong opinion about, like, it's more like, if I say you should choose yourself, does someone have a strong reaction to that or not, good or bad? If they don't, then it's probably not a super provocative idea. If you said, "Oh, I'm writing this book about how it's the choose yourself economy," they'd be like, "Okay,
Yeah, boring.
you know,
No, I agree.
yeah,
So I choose yourself
yeah,"
work.
or pick yourself. They'd be like, "What? That's weird, right?" But when you really nail, so often the most important decision you make is just about turning it until you get that click.
But in terms of like pivoting your writing approach in the attempts that to hit the home run, as opposed to kind of being a sequel driven writer, with Conspiracy, you really pivoted. You told a story. That
Yeah.
was your first book where you told a story from beginning to end. You were a storyteller.
Yeah, and I wanted to just see if I could do it. Part of it was just testing and trying, and now it's the director of the Hunger Games is trying to turn it into a movie. So
Oh, wow.
it could be a sort of totally transformative thing. It was also a risk, right? Like if it was a risk, but not really a risk, right? If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and I go back to what I'm doing. And if it does work, it could totally change the direction of my life. So I try. To me, what gets me excited is like, is this something new that I haven't done before that I can get better by doing? That's sort of my test for whether I want to work on something.
So without maybe revealing what your next writing project is, what's the way you're thinking about pivoting? Like, how do you think about reinventing? So writing's a craft you've developed over many years, and how do you think in terms of what your next pivot is? I don't like that word. Your next reinvention
I get it.
is.
So I've done these books on Stoicism, and that's sort of a philosophy I try to live my life by. It's what I'm really interested in, and it's clearly what has resonated with audiences. But like now, I'm thinking like, how do I expand that? How do I open up another channel, right? And so the next book, which will be a sequel to Ego and Obstacle, is going to try to include or sort of make some larger theory about the commonalities between other philosophical schools. So again, it's about challenging me. It's like, okay, so I know a ton about Stoicism, but I know nothing about Buddhism or Confucianism or Hinduism or even Christianity. I'm an atheist, so I'm not that interested in it, or I don't naturally know that much about it. But sort of, can I set down to master these other things the way that I've mastered this other philosophy, and then can I come up with something unique or new or provocative about that? So that's what I'm going to try to do.
Well, it's interesting because Stoicism, the way like everybody's heard about Stoicism, but you really popularized it.
They've heard of lowercase Stoicism, right? Like the idea of like Stoic meaning doesn't have any emotions, but they don't actually know anything about it, right? And so that's what I tried to fix.
But I feel like, in Western culture, there's of course people who are religious Christians or Jews or whatever, and then there's a lot of people who move towards exploring Buddhism, Hinduism, but then there's a lot of people who are just agnostic or atheists, however they label themselves. They don't want to label themselves with a religion or a belief system, and it feels like I see a lot of these people. They still have some sort of hole that they need to fill. And a lot of them go towards, let's say, something like transcendental meditation, which could be bullshit or whatever. But I think Stoicism is a good out for them to find a philosophy to live their life by without saying they're religious or believe in something mystical or whatever.
Well, Viktor Frankl talked about this idea of like the existential vacuum, that this is like the fundamental problem of the 20th and the 21st century, which is that like religion has fallen away, your sort of small town familial unit has fallen away, and even like the old way of doing things is just, you don't have to do it that way anymore, which is great on the one hand because a lot of these things were oppressive and restrictive, and based on nothing in many cases, but so you get rid of them. Well, now there's this huge question of like, how the fuck do you live your life? And like, what's important, what's not important, what's right or wrong, what is the basis for why it's right or wrong? So we have, in a weird way, we've got rid of these oppressive systems, and then we haven't provided anything in return. And so in turn, so for people who sort of intuitively know what's right and wrong or how to live or what they want to do, they're fine. But then what about the other people? Well, they end up joining the alt-right, or they commit suicide, or they get depressed, or they join a cult, or like, people need we have these big questions and we're desperate for some kind of answer. And to me, what's fascinating about Stoicism is that when it came sort of age, it was in this unique period where sort of the old sort of Greek and Roman system of like polytheism, like all these different gods that were playing this active role in your life and you had to sacrifice to, all that was sort of going away. We were graduating away from that. But then Christianity hadn't really replaced it yet. Like Seneca and Jesus were born in the same year and they were alive at the same time. So again, not to offend Christian people, but like to me, when I read Seneca's writing and he's like a successful, wealthy, ordinary person who's dealing with loss and grief and ambition and all these normal things, and he's writing letters to his friends of like, here's a good idea and here's a good idea. I like that more than the third-hand accounts of some mystical guy who went around and, you know, turned water into wine and, you know, loaves and fishes. Like, you know what I mean? Like when you read the Bible as a historical document, you're like, this is kind of ridiculous, right? And then you read Seneca and you're like, I know that guy. And so I think that's why Stoicism has resonated so much.
But now though, you because you're in your own personal reinvention, you don't want to write just a third or fourth book about Stoicism. You want to take the next.
Yeah, well, I just want to make it bigger and more inclusive, and I want to draw on wisdom wherever it's. That's not to say there's not sort of beautiful pieces of advice or insights in Christianity or in Hinduism or Zen Buddhism or whatever, and I want to incorporate them all into some sort of larger thesis about, you know, how we make our way through this crazy, fucked up world.
I think there's been a couple of articles in the past few years that you've written and that I've written the opposite.
Okay.
I think one might have been on writing a book.
Yes.
And one was on don't start. You wrote, whatever you do, don't start a podcast. And then I said, whatever you do, start a podcast.
Yeah.
So, and we didn't, it's not like it was like an angry set of articles, but like, because you had great points, which is that I will tell you, like, this is a very successful podcast. It is not going to make a podcast is not going to make anyone rich. I think maybe Joe Rogan's got the only wealthy podcast out there. So you make good points. And I think also most people don't realize that there's a craft and a skill to doing a podcast and doing it well. And that's not so easy. But, you know, I think there's many good reasons to do one as well.
Yeah, there are good reasons. I sort of have this instinctive reaction against people who do things because everyone else is doing them. Do you know what I mean? Like, I love stand-up comedy, which is why I would never do stand-up comedy, because I don't have the bandwidth or the interest to like actually dedicate myself to what I think that craft deserves. And so I hate when people do that to the thing that I have dedicated myself to. So, you know, I hate when people think of like I wrote this article like several years ago about how books are a business card, and I deeply regret it because it's filled the world with shitty books that shouldn't exist.
I wrote that too, that books are like a business card.
Yeah.
But there's a point, which is that if let's say you're Procter & Gamble and you're deciding on a speaker for your next executive retreat, and all you know is you have two choices, and all you know is one of the choices wrote a book, the other didn't. You pick the person who wrote a book.
Yes.
So a book's like an event more than, but in terms of the craft, I agree with you. It's still hard to write a book.
So from a cold business logic, I totally get it, and I've taken advantage of it myself. On the other hand, the book that the person made so they could get picked as a speaker by Procter & Gamble, I can bet you is dog shit, right? Like, it's not worth reading. And so that's sort of what I'm reacting against. Like for instance, podcasts, great networking tool. You're going to meet all these people and have long extent. Okay, sure. But that's a shitty reason to do a podcast, because if your goal is to make something good for listeners, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, you kind of have to have all the reasons.
Yeah.
Like you want to always, you know, mid conversation, I'm always cognizant of, is this providing value? Is the person listening to this going to say, you know, there were some parts of this conversation I really needed to share with my friend or cousin or whatever. But the other thing is, right on this very stage last week, I hung out with the Fonz for this podcast.
Yeah.
And that was great.
Sure.
So there's both reasons. Although it's like I've been on a lot of podcasts And it's amazing how many people just have like this printed list of questions and they're just bad interviewers. There's no.
Yeah, it's like a get rich quick scheme. They're like, oh, somebody did it and they got famous and successful for it. So I just have to follow their exact playbook and then I will get the same results. And it's not going to happen. And so those are the people I'm discouraging. And it's sort of like, in Fight Club, it's like they're telling you to go away to see if you'll go away. And the ones that stay for 3 days, so in some ways, like when I'm saying don't start a podcast or don't do a book, it's like for instance, the best reason to write a book is that you have to do it. Like you can't not do it. And so if someone can convince you not to do it because of the following reasons, then they've actually done you a huge favor because you were never cut out for it in the first place.
Which, by the way, is good advice for anything.
Yeah, like, Amazon and Zappos, they'll like pay you to quit, right? After 90 days, if you get a job at like working the phones at Amazon or Zappos, they'll, at the end, they'll go like, okay, so 3 months pay would be however much. We'll give you that if you leave right now. Because if you take the money, you weren't going to be they're actually saving themselves money in the long term of having to replace you. And so it's like, if you can convince yourself not to write a book or not to do this thing or not to move over here, then take the money and run. Do you know what I mean? Because you're not cut out for it.
I was thinking this a lot last year because not only did I not write a book last year, I didn't feel like writing a book. It's like the first year,
which is a great reason not to write a book.
So I didn't write one, and but I did think a lot about, okay, where am I heading? What is, things change so much. You do have to think a little bit about what is the medium that people are at. I agree with you. You can't always go to what's hot, but the flip side is you want to skate to where the puck is going.
Sure.
So, I didn't feel like, I don't know, writing a book would satisfy anything for me creatively last year. And I didn't have anything to write about specifically. And I was enjoying the like you said, coming up on this stage. Writing a book could be read by 1 million people. On this stage, there's like 100 people in the audience. So it's a much smaller audience, but it was terrifying to me. Like I would come up.
When you're getting better for it, you're improving. And so I think that's totally worth doing. I mean,
it was like hard work.
Yes.
So like instead of, I could spend 12 hours doing this instead of writing a book on a day, preparing for this.
But see, that's why I was thinking, I think for your next book, you should think much bigger and it should be worth that investment. It should take longer. If I could sort of wave a magic wand and in a year from now, give you a choose yourself level transformative book about a different topic, that would be a huge sort of improvement for you. And that would be interesting. It would open up new avenues. You'd have new people in your audience. It would make money. You'd be excited about all that stuff. And so I think instead of just trying to sort of churn out another book, I'd think bigger. And then while you're thinking bigger, do other things that you like that are getting you excited.
I think there's also some benefit to just doing nothing.
Sure.
Like, everybody thinks, oh, what's the next step or what's my purpose in life? And there's really no such thing. And
no,
it's not
your main purpose as an animal is to not die and to have children. Those are your main purposes as an animal, right? And that's what your genes are here to do. Like I have these 2 donkeys. I live on a farm, and sometimes I'll go out there. My donkey.
Is this a metaphor for children?
Yes. I also have a kid, but so the donkeys are just standing there. They just stand there, and sometimes they'll stand there for like hours. They won't do anything. They're just standing there. And so at first I thought this was funny, and then I realized that they're doing their job. Like their job is just to stand. Like as long as they don't die, that's like a good day as a donkey. You know what I mean? And why is it somehow like a human's not an animal? Like it's not the same thing, And my therapist said to me once, she said, it's human being, not human doing for a reason. But we somehow think that we have to be doing and making and creating and earning and winning. Or if we don't, we're somehow like...
And yet I look at your career, though. You've had a career of... like, how old are you? You're
31.
You like, and so I've known you since you were like 23, 24, something. So you've had this career of steady, continual improvement where, you're writing more and more interesting books. I'm not saying one book's better than the other, but like you're definitely increasing your breadth of books. and more and more people are aware of your impact. You become like this millennial, you know, a lot of people want kind of the arc of career that you're creating for yourself. And it seems like you've been able to do that very instinctively. Like, what were sort of the problems along the way? Like, it seems like almost too easy.
No, it was definitely not easy, but I mean, there were many lucky breaks along the way. Certainly, I think through brute force, I could have gotten where I have gotten eventually. But the fact that I got to publish my first book by 25 instead of 35, that was like the main lucky break.
I don't think that was a lucky break. At that point, you had already worked for Robert Greene, Tim Ferriss, Tucker Max, and then director of marketing at American Apparel. It was sort of like a natural thing. It would be almost impossible for you to not write a book at that point.
Yeah, sure, but I'm just saying, like, those things could have happened over a longer period of time. Like, there were chance meetings that allowed that to all happen quicker than maybe it would have normally happened for a different person. So I sort of try to bear that in mind. But I don't know. I mean, part of it was I've always had this sort of deep compulsion to like work. And actually, ironically, I'm now working on sort of not being that, right? Like, because again, it's not sustainable to write 8 books in 6 years. Like, you just can't do it. You can't do that. You'll die. You'll just keel over and die. Or the quality, it's not sustainable that the quality of work would continue to increase. At some point, you would plateau. And so I've been trying to sort of be much more conscious about what I'm doing. And so in some ways, it's like, oftentimes I feel like whatever our main strength is can also be a profound weakness for us, right? So for me, that sort of intensity can be a problem. For Donald Trump, Donald Trump's main strength, and I actually mean his main strength is shamelessness, right? That's his main strength. Like, to get up. So in the second debate, like 5 days before the debate, the Access Hollywood tape leaks, right? You or I, if someone, let's say you had said that horrible shit, and then you got caught and the whole world knew about it, I would probably kill myself, right?
I would cry.
Yeah, I would cry, and then I would probably kill myself, and then I would obviously drop out of the presidential race and then never be seen from publicly again if I didn't kill myself. Donald Trump got up in front of like 70 million people, or however many people watched the debate, and he was like, oh yeah, it's locker room talk. Like, his strength was that he could say that with a straight face, right? Like, that he could say complete and utter bullshit in front of millions of people when he should have been churning with self-loathing and embarrassment and humiliation. That's his main strength, right? Like, every day Donald Trump wakes up and he has to be Donald Trump, and he continues to wake up, right? Like, that's really that's I couldn't do that.
That's a funny bit.
I couldn't do that. I would definitely kill myself if I traded places with it. How many nights could you walk around the White House in a bathrobe, your wife living hundreds of miles away, and you're like texting Sean Hannity for validation? You know what I mean? That's like the worst life I could possibly imagine. So he does that. So, but again, this is also his profound weakness and why he's always in trouble. And people are like, why can't he just be president and not tweet? Well, because he doesn't. If you're a shameless person, the person who can get up on stage and describe that tape as locker room talk is the person who doesn't get that calling a black woman on Twitter a dog is a bad idea, right? Like, so often, again, the long way of saying, often our strengths are our weaknesses. And so, like, for you, if I was like, what's James? You have I was saying this when I was talking to the cameras earlier, is like, you have this compulsive, you can't not be in front of an audience, right? Like, you have to be writing, podcasting. And then when I heard you were doing comedy, I was like, oh yeah, sure. James isn't writing for millions of people. He has to get in front of a room of 50 people every night for $10. Like, that's James, right? And
$10, that would be a lot compared to try negative $100,000.
So what makes you so good is that you always want to be communicating. You always have something to say, but left unchecked, that eventually would get you in trouble in some way too, right? And so I think it's interesting that you're talking about like being more conscious about what you make and don't make. And so I think that's what we're all doing. We're all struggling with whatever like with whatever thing we got from our childhood is both like strength and our weakness.
So you're when it's this started, you're about to apply it to yourself. Like, what's your strength that's also your weakness?
I'm sort of very intense, and I can be writing 2 books at the same time and running a company and having a farm, and I can do all these things. And then, my wife will be like, I can't, like, this is horrible. Like, this is good for you, but it's literally torture for me, So I think one of the, I can sort of just, I can drive other people into the ground. I just work them to the point where they're like, this is the worst thing in the world. I hate you, and I can eventually, there's also times I do that to myself too. So I have trouble turning it off.
So what's the weakness there? Because so far, so good. It's worked well for you. Now, yes, you can say,
but like, let's say I'd just done one book. Like, let's say I'd just done The Obstacle Is the Way. I'd been more patient, more deliberate. That book would probably be better, right?
I don't know. That was a good book.
But I think it would be better. I pushed it. I think it would be better. And instead of, so I've sold like 1.5 million books. But if I'd sold 1.5 million copies of one book, I'd be one. That would be a substantially different sort of kind of impact than having it spread out over these different books, for instance. So I have trouble sort of strategically focusing and being disciplined. Okay, here's an example of how it turns into a weakness. I have an Apple Watch, and I have like a calorie goal that I'm supposed to hit in terms of exercise every day. It's like 1,000 calories of movement in every day. And so this was maybe like in March or April. For whatever reason, I'd been working and traveling a lot. And so it was like I had 7 days in a row, then I had 14 days in a row. I ended up doing like 35 days in a row of hitting this thing without any rest. And so, like, in a weird way, stopping on the 36th day was way harder for me than doing the do you know what I mean? Like, it was actually harder for me to be disciplined about self-discipline than it was to just like keep doing this thing infinitely, right? And so on the 35th day that I stopped, it's not like I got an award, right? I actually got mono. Like, I just wore my whole body out, and then I got sick, and I was like out of commission for like 2 months. So it's not good to be so intense. It causes problems.
So let me just ask people here, can people identify, like, what's your strength that might be a weakness?
First thing I thought was, as far as weakness was, procrastination, time management, that type of thing, which I don't know if can be construed as a weakness or as a strength. I don't know if it ever works out. Maybe people can relate to it, so that can be helpful in sales or other ways. But the first thing I thought is I'm terrible at time management.
But okay, so now make it. I think that the reverse holds true too, which is that weaknesses can be turned into strengths. So I think
I'll give you a good example. So I was just watching, and it's worth, the meme of Michael Jordan crying.
No.
You've never seen this?
No.
So this comes from when he gave his Hall of Fame speech.
Social media?
Yes, it's on the interwebs. But when Michael Jordan gave his Hall of Fame speech in 2009, he's inducted into the Hall of Fame. He said that originally his plan was to go up on stage and be like, "Thanks, I appreciate it." Instead, he decided to give a speech. And so his speech, this is the most successful basketball player of all time, the crowning achievement of his life. And he gets up and he lists basically every slight that he's ever received in his life, and then says, like, "I just want you to know that you were wrong." Like, he brings up the guy who got cut, or who he got cut to make room for on his high school basketball team. He mentions that his college coach didn't mention him in a Sports Illustrated article when he was in college. He even complains at the event about how expensive it was to buy tickets for his whole family to attend the event, and how it used to be cheaper. And basically, it's a real window into Michael Jordan's soul, which is that Michael Jordan looks for things to make him angry, like he looks for slights, and then that fuels his competitiveness, and he has to beat or humiliate or dominate that person for doing that thing to him. Okay, so that's his strength. It's why he's so great. But then also he can't enjoy the greatest moment of his life without it's like he keeps the scabs raw because he uses them, but then he's just like bleeding all the time. He's just always angry. Even though he owns $1 billion shoe company, he's sitting there complaining about how at one time in like the early 90s, the owner of the Bulls said organizations win championships, right? What he meant was that it was a team effort. And Michael Jordan is like, no, I win the championships. How could you? He's like, and he's actually mad at his crowning achievement event that the owner was invited. Like, that's a horrible way to live, right? That's not success at that level should not mean that you can't even enjoy a banquet being thrown in your honor.
Yeah, although and we'll start to wrap this up and go into Q&A, but I've even asked you advice on this several years ago. One time there was a series of articles that were disparaging to me, and it's hard not to take it personally. So Michael Jordan obviously took these things personally, but it's hard. It's like you almost need like a ratio of like 1,000 to 1, like 1,000 good things, to match the one bad thing, even if the one bad thing's so stupid and irrational. So I kind of get where he's coming from. It's not necessarily that he used that to drive his competitiveness. It's just he really hated those people who...
No, but he says it. He's like, every time you did this to me, it was like a log on the fire for me. And so he was actively seeking out slights and aggravations to motivate himself, which it's great. It clearly worked. But then the problem is you can't turn it off. And that's not how you want to live. That might be how you want to be on the basketball court, but it's not how you want to be as a person. And
maybe
so
there's a
the
fear.
balance.
Maybe there's a fear that if you this is my strength, you say, but if I also realize it's a weakness, so I want to try to balance my life or turn it off sometimes, maybe I'm going to lose that edge.
Well, like, so for me, it's like, okay, if my talent is that I'm very intense and focused and I try to get great at everything, what that means is I take something like a hobby, like running, and then I turn it into a fucking unpaid job, right? And then I squeeze the fun out of it. And then now I just have this other new thing on my to-do list. And again, that's a strength. That's why I'm good at what I do professionally. But if left unchecked, it might make me unhappy personally. And I think that's the balance.
So over this next year or two, I don't like to think in terms of goals because every day you learn something new and that always can shift the directions you go. But where do you see yourself a year from now?
I just want to be a better writer. Like, I just want to be a better writer, and I want to be more sort of balanced and even-keeled as a human being.
So you find the craft that you love, and just each day, whether you write or not, or whether you publish or not, each day you figure out how to get a little better at it.
Yeah, because yes, exactly. And what's nice about that is it's not tied to any external things, right? Like, I can be a better writer whether I sell 1,000 copies that day or 0 copies, whether I'm in the New York Times or savaged in the New York Times, right? Like, it's totally dependent on me.
Well, first off, I like the advice you gave me when I wrote Choose Yourself. I forget if you said you could choose 1 out of 3 or 2 out of 3, but you were very smart. You said you could either choose, we were talking about goals for the book, and you said you could either choose the New York Times bestseller list, or you could choose number of copies sold, or you could choose money.
And making the most money from the project.
Right. And I think I think people often don't, they start a passion or they start something and they get confused about the outcomes. They don't really know, because not that you have to have an outcome, but you have to have a vague understanding of what the options are to know which direction you're going to pursue.
And making sure that the outcome that you're seeking is not some sort of egotistical thing. So it's like people go like, well, I want to be in the New York Times with a book because they think that means they'll sell a lot of copies. But in fact, they're just choosing like this gatekeeper saying you're okay at the expense of actually reaching lots of people often. So it's like you gotta know the space that you're in really well.
And this was a marketing strategy we worked out for Choose Yourself. We specifically avoided the bestseller list, although it did hit the Wall Street Journal one and the USA Today one. We avoided the money question, and we just focused on number of sales, even offering to pay people back in the first 3 months if they didn't like the book, which no one's ever really done before because no mainstream publisher would ever agree to that. But I had the opportunity to offer that.
Yeah, and look, you ended up reaching 10 times the amount of people that even a typical author would dream of being able to reach. And isn't that why you wrote the book? Do you know what I mean? Like, you didn't write the book to get a good New York Times review and then sell 700 copies. You wanted to sell 700,000 copies or a million copies.
And then I like your whole thing was, okay, 6 months in advance, you should be thinking of your marketing events. Like, what are you going to do from a marketing perspective? Not what are you going to advertise that's within the book, because no one's read the book yet. You have to kind of do something in the real world that will attract attention. And so one thing I did, I forgot who came up with the idea, or maybe it was a combination, but I built a store that only accepted Bitcoin and only sold one item, which was Choose Yourself. And so I sold a bunch of copies in this Bitcoin only store.
I think you sold like 3 copies.
No, I sold. I'll tell you exactly. I sold about 61 or 62.
Okay.
For 0.1
Huge
Bitcoin.
Numbers. Yes.
Yeah, a PDF.
Yeah.
So which now it's like $600 for a PDF of Choose Yourself in today's prices. At that point, it was like $5. And I remember I made the announcement that I was the best-selling Bitcoin only author in history, and CNBC asked me to go on and talk about it and talk about Bitcoin. And Herb Greenberg, who's kind of a natural skeptic, he was the anchor, and he asked me, "Did you just do this for publicity?" And I said, "Well, I'm on national television right now, so it totally worked." And he acknowledged that, and it did work. But I want to open it up now for Q&A for both of us, and this is all still part of the podcast. So Jay, this is still part of the podcast.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, sure. Check. All right. It's so cool being here. It's weird, I feel like I'm friends with both of you, even though you don't know who I am.
Are you? That sounds scary.
I joined your self-publishing course.
Oh, good.
And I'm very aware that we're not friends, but I feel like I've read your books. I've just heard your voice in the car for years, and it's like
I'm always in the back seat.
And when I'm in the car, I always chime in. I feel like I'm a part of the conversation. I felt there were so many times I'm like, had to back off a little bit, but I'm in your self-publishing course. Thank you for that. You're
welcome. I just want to add, self-publishing, you always go with a mainstream publisher, and I respect it, and I know why, and it's you have a great relationship with your agents, your publishers. Most people don't get that kind of relationship,
right?
Because for many reasons, there's a whole spectrum of reasons. But when you self-publish, yes, there's more opportunities. It's not even so clear to me that self-published books are on average even worse than mainstream published books, because someone did a study on the star rankings on Amazon, and actually the self-published books were ranked higher.
Most books are bad across the board, so the idea that self-published versus traditional published, the majority of them are going to be bad. It's just really hard to do a good book, and so they're just rare, period.
And I think a traditional publisher gets you in, for you only, and for a few other people, gets you in the airport bookstores, gets you in more bookstores, which is what a traditional publisher could do, but doesn't do it for most authors. So you might as well self-publish and get 100% of the profits instead of 15% minus your agent's cut.
Yeah, although I think it depends, right? The thing we talked about is your goal to be in the New York Times? Is it to sell as many copies? Is it to make as much money as possible? And I think depending on where those variables balance out and what the idea for the book is, then you make the decision to self-publish or traditional publish. But too many people think about that before they even have a good idea for a book. So it's like, let's just have a really good idea for a book that's needs to exist. And if it doesn't exist, the world will be a worse place. And I know people think that their idea is that, but I promise you it almost certainly is not that yet, because you haven't done the work.
But I like your advice that if you can convince yourself not to do it, that's a good test.
Yeah.
Like if it hasn't been, if it's been written before, but just only slightly, you can't improve an older product by 5%.
Yeah,
because
people
nobody knows the difference.
This is like Facebook, but it's for people who live in Utah. It's like the fact that you had to say it's like this other thing means that the other thing is already dominant and good enough.
Right, it has to be like I always feel like it has to be like a 5 to 10x better
Yeah.
than anything written before. But I'm sorry, I interrupted the question.
No, that's fine. Yeah, absolutely.
I always interrupt.
All very, and I know you do, and I love the Fight Club example. You know, you're too blonde, you know, and the guy just stays there. It's one of my favorite movies. And you, Ryan, we had a couple really small email exchanges, and you helped me get a guest post into Daily Stoic called
cool.
Stoicism and Compassion, a False Dichotomy. And then I don't know if it was you or Brent, but somebody got it into The Observer, where it was published as well, and that was probably about a year and a half ago.
Congrats.
And thank you, and you've been really encouraging toward my writing, whether you know it or not, and that's what encouraged me to do this course as well. I said I finally need to finish a work that I know is within me. What I really wanted to bring up, this is not a question, but this is something that, I was taking I live in the Hudson Valley. I was taking the Metro North, Kingston. So I get on in Poughkeepsie. Mm-hmm. You were in Cold Springs for a while, right? So I'm on the Metro North, and I'm flipping through this book, which I read years ago, and just thinking, I know there's a Q&A, let me see. And I stumbled upon this passage that I wanted to tell you about. And this was the Simple Daily Practice chapter, right? And you write, if you think everything would be better off if I were dead, then think, that's really cool. Now I can do anything I want, and I can postpone this thought for a while, maybe even a few months, because what does it matter now? The planet might not even be around in a few months. Who knows what could happen with all these solar flares? You know the ones I'm talking about.
Yeah, and it's funny because I just had this conversation with someone earlier today, which is that, at one point, suicide's a horrible thing, and unfortunately, someone I knew, her husband died over the weekend. Who knows the reason? Could be possibly that. But suicide's a horrible thing because in the beginning, it's like this funnel, and you're like a marble in a funnel, and you think you have like these huge amount of choices, and it just gets smaller and smaller and smaller until you feel like there's one way out. But for me, once I started actively Googling how to kill myself and figuring out exactly how I wanted to do it, because, by the way, most people do suicide like amateurs. Like they either hurt themselves. Like, why jump off of a bridge? This is what happens.
It seems very terrifying. Why would you want that to be the last moment?
Yeah, and it's not only terrifying because I'm afraid of heights, for instance. It's not only terrifying, but you don't die on the way down magically. You hit the water, you break every bone in your body so you can't move, and then you just sink because you can't move and you drown. That's how you die.
Right. I'd rather just go on being depressed. That seems so much worse.
Right. And so once though I took that literally or metaphorical leap of like really Googling it and researching it, I realized, well, okay, now that I've got it figured out, it cost me nothing to just stay alive one more day. And that kept me going for a long time.
Yeah. So I'm a social worker. And I was doing.
Are you gonna give me therapy now?
I was doing therapy with and obviously a lot of people who with suicidal ideation. There was this one guy who I just could not figure out how to help, and I was doing everything I could. I was reading books. I took like Tony Robbins' life coaching program. Like I was doing everything to figure out how do I reach this guy, and it just seemed like so hopeless. And I start to feel hopeless, which is never good. And he ended up attempting suicide by overdose. And he was in the hospital, and I'm thinking it was the night before, and I was going to go visit him, and it was the night before, and I was reading this book at the time, and I came across that passage, and I tried everything. I said, I'm going to go see this guy in the hospital, whether that's crossing a boundary, I don't care. We have a rapport. I want to go see this guy. So I get there, and he starts talking to me about the same financial struggles he was having. I said, hold on a second. I said, this is extra. I said, this is all extra. You're not even supposed to be here right now with the amount of pills that you took, right? And I had this moment where I was telling him, and you're going to come back to life, essentially. You did die. You're going to come back to life, and you're going to be complaining about these financial struggles. I said, consider this extra. I said, right now, you're supposed to be dead. You could do anything you want right now. And it came from this passage. And I never saw him again. And get this, about 4 months went by, and at the practice I worked at the time, all that showed up was a postcard from Ohio that said, I'm okay, thank you.
Hmm.
And it was from him.
What's your name?
Zach.
Zach
Yeah.
what?
Bodenweber.
And, congratulations to you for really taking that extra step. Like you already had the kind of professional training, but then looking towards the Tony Robbins
Everything.
coaching classes, other resources, like really trying to help this patient. I think going that extra mile is what really saves lives and helps people. And I think most people don't. Most people want to do their 9 to 5 and go home because they think 9 to 5 is, that's the hours they're supposed to work. But life is 24 hours a day, for better or for worse. And so going that extra step's really important. That's what you really did for that man. So congratulations on that.
Well, and thank you, because it was your words that inspired that. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, who do we want to go to next?
Ryan, from what he said so far, do you think the dessert at 9:15 or suicide on a bridge? What would you choose?
Which one's more likely?
Tim wrote this really good article a couple years ago about depression, and there was one thing I thought about
That was my real question.
I think was a good argument against suicide. He was like, you actually don't know what's on the other side, and it could be way worse. So let's say hell does exist. Let's say there's a 1 in 50 chance. You're rolling the dice that what you don't actually know for a fact that whatever is. Not only do you not know how much it's going to hurt to break every bone in your body jumping off a bridge, but then what if you're in purgatory forever, right? Like, great, you just traded one shitty situation for another situation. So I like the humility of like, look, I don't know what's next, so I'm just going to make the most of whatever I got.
I think if you can think about it, that's almost a stoicism approach, which is that we just simply don't know. We don't know most things. Well, so if someone's a king and another person's a servant, that's just a story we made up. It doesn't actually exist in reality. That's just the story we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing about death and afterlife and suicide and opportunity and happiness and success. We don't really know what these things mean. Like in your last book, you wrote about a billionaire who was so desperately angry, he spent 10 years secretly plotting the demise of someone he could have just flicked that guy off his pants or whatever.
Sure.
And he was just obsessively angry. Tell me if this is true. I find with most, not with everybody, but with most billionaires that I've encountered, they're either they're either obsessed with anti-aging research because now they have all this.
Yeah.
Now they have all this money, they want to live forever. Otherwise, what's the point? Or they're obsessed with libertarianism because now they made all this money. They want to make sure no government can take that money away.
Yeah, no, and look, I think this is kind of the same. This is what made them great is that how they question things and they try to do things differently, and they have this sense. They have this sense that they deserve $1 billion. That's how they ended up having $1 billion. And then, ironically, it makes them not that happy when they have $1 billion. And so, yeah, it's very weird. They're not. I've met a handful, and I don't know if I'd trade places with that many of them.
Yeah,
You know what I
I
mean?
remember. Do you watch the TV show Billions?
Yeah, of course.
Anybody here watch the TV show Billions? So this past season, I was an advisor on the show, and I remember thinking there was one part of the script. I don't know if you remember where Axe's wife says, $300 million. I don't know if we could live on that. And I wrote back to the writer of that particular episode. It's like, I don't know if somebody would really say that. And he instantly called me, the writer of that particular episode, and said, we will decide what she says.
Yeah.
That is not for you. She would say that. That's how we've defined that character. And that's based on our research. They've seen people say that. So it's sort of, and I know when I first made money, I had before the first time I went broke, the reason why I went broke is I made so much money than I could have ever thought imaginable. And yet in my brain, I thought I was living below the poverty line. Like I actually thought I was already broke, even though I had millions of dollars. And so I thought I needed 10 times as much to actually have money and not be completely about to self-destruct. So of course I self-destructed, because what you picture is what you get in some sense. If you buy a Honda Civic, suddenly you see all the Honda Civics on the road.
Right.
If you say to yourself, "Oh, I have 10 million, but that's poverty," then I'm going to find poverty everywhere.
Because you're not comparing yourself to poor people, you're comparing yourself to richer people, and so that's the misery. You'll never actually be in a position where you're feeling like you have enough.
Yeah, and there's no way we live in this tribal. We're ultimately primates who think we're tribal animals, even though we've evolved sort of past that. But there's always this tendency to put yourself in a hierarchy and compare. And the easiest one to put yourself in is the money hierarchy. Like if somebody has $10 and another person has $9, you think you're less. Self-worth becomes conflated with net worth. Or if you're a tennis player, you conflate your self-worth with your tennis ranking. We're always kind of desperate to put ourselves in a hierarchy rather than I always try to diversify my hierarchies a little bit. So if let's say I lose money one day investing, I'll come here. Or let's say I bomb here, I'll play a game of chess or write a chapter in a book or whatever. Like, it's good to diversify those hierarchies. That's the one thing that humans can do somehow magically.
No, I love that.
So I just want to check the time, make sure we're good on everything. Yeah, perfect.
Hi, I have two questions. One for James, one for Ryan.
No, this is okay.
Okay, for James, I love you, and I think you are one of the best podcasters there, interviewers.
Thank you.
there, and I enjoy it very much and find it very satisfying. The drink here is very potent. So sorry about that.
We fill up all the alcohol.
Yeah.
You get your money's worth on the
Yeah,
alcohol.
so
here.
you guys were talking about billionaires. So do you have any interest or plan to interview Elon Musk or at least his mother? So that's a question for you. And for Ryan, you've been talking about tattoos for your book titles, and where are they? So these are the two questions.
That one's easy. They're right here on my arms.
I don't see them.
Well, Jeff,
I don't see them.
Making it up.
do you have conspiracy written somewhere?
No.
What about your
Just
next book
those two.
title? Because you still haven't told me what the topic of your next book is.
I'm planning on where I already have the title, and I'm just planning where it's going to go.
And so to answer your question on Elon Musk, I actually don't want to interview him. And I've interviewed Ashley Vance, who wrote a great book about Elon Musk. I think it's an excellent biography, and he's very interesting. I know a lot of people around Elon Musk, and it's funny. I actually have, as Steve, my podcast producer, knows, I have like abnormally strict standards for who I want on the podcast, and I'd rather interview Ryan Holiday on the podcast than Elon Musk. So I can't really say what those standards are. No, I've interviewed I've interviewed over 15 billionaires on the podcast, and some of them are just wonderful, amazing, charitable people. I mean, I've interviewed Sarah Blakely, who started Spanx, is the most successful self-made female billionaire. I was begging my daughters to come to that podcast, but they didn't want to miss a math class or something in their bullshit high school. So, and I interviewed Ken Langone, who started Home Depot and created hundreds of thousands of jobs. And also, if you drive around New York City, the NYU Langone Medical Centers, all the hospitals in New York City are named after him because of his hundreds of millions of dollars in charity. So I've interviewed many amazing, successful people who are worth over $1 billion, who are really the kind of people I would like. Sometimes I interview people and I'm like, boy, I wish I could be friends with them more, but I don't want to. I don't really feel like picking up the phone and calling Ken Langone and saying, "Hey, Ken, want to grab a coffee today, maybe?" But I've interviewed a really nice group of success. Again, is not measured in money, but I have interviewed a lot of people who've been worth over $1 billion, and they were very good people. So,
All right. So after this one questions, we're gonna take one more. Right?
Got to make room for dessert.
Yeah,
right?
he's gonna take one first.
All right. James, hi. I'm a big fan of yours. I'm a big fan of Choose Yourself and
Thank
the
you.
podcast, really. I'm actually a doctor. I could have done your IV today because we would do that in the office. But my question to you...
I just got a prescription today, too. I just want to tell you.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt the question.
We're used to that.
So I was so proud of myself. I had a streak for 32 years. I hadn't gone to a doctor.
Oh, wow.
And
Put us out of business.
I don't have any health insurance. I've never had health insurance, which I guess is against the law, but who cares? Yeah, see, who needs health insurance? It's a scam. But I've been coughing for 4 straight weeks, and so finally, I was convinced in a variety of ways that I have to go to a doctor or else. So I went to I've been to psychiatrists and dentists
Not really
and
doctors, no.
optometrists, but I hadn't gone to like an actual just general doctor. And I saw this doctor, and he listens to the back, listens to the front, and you cough, and he's like, okay, and he takes no, he didn't take an X-ray, and he's like, okay, yeah, I think you have pneumonia. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, how can you tell pneumonia? Don't people die from that? Like 1 in 5 people die from that. And how can you just wrapped on my chest? And he's like, yeah, I feel like, you're coughing up some stuff. It's probably pneumonia. And so I'm like, and so he prescribes all these things. I go to the pharmacy, get all the drugs, start taking the antibiotics, which apparently once you start taking them, you have to finish to the end or your head gets chopped off or something.
Something like that.
I never understood that logic. Like if a medicine's bad for
It's
you,
not true, but
you
anyway.
still have to take it to the end. But then I had a prescription also to get an X-ray. So I go to NYU Langone Centers, radiology. Never been there, barely been in the hospital in my life other than to visit someone, which is a mistake. And I get the X-ray, and then since it's all done electronically, he sends back this message. Oh, I see absolutely nothing on the X-ray. There's no pneumonia. There's no bronchitis. You just have like a cough or whatever. And then I write back to him, well, should I be taking these antibiotics then? And he writes back, but this electronic system is so screwed up, I can't retrieve my password anymore. So he responded. I have no idea what he said.
What you're saying, too, is just so much about the choose yourself in medicine, because that's one of the questions I wanted to ask you. About 10 years ago, I published a book about a new therapy I'd helped bring about. And then 10 years went by, and I felt deep down there was this other book in me. And I'm going through the process of doing self-publishing. So I want to ask you and Ryan, one of the things I do miss, though, going through self-publishing, though, is the editing or working with somebody process. And I just was wondering, when you do your books and you self-publish, do you work with like an editor or someone? Because it's sort of like give and take that I find, it's one thing when you sit and you're writing and,
Sure.
get stuff out, but have somebody reflect on your writing and say, wow, you know what, maybe you should bring this out or that out. So
I mean, look, the editor at a publisher is just a salaried employee. I mean, it's it's a skill, right? So you just hire someone to edit your book.
Yeah. Well, I've done that a little bit with Author House, and you get like this, again, it's almost like your medical experience. You just get these like lines back. Oh, maybe add this or that. And I miss the interaction, honestly.
So I've published with many mainstream publishers, traditional publishers, and I've also self-published. The editors for traditional publishers, I'm not going to disparage anybody. I was going to, but now I've decided not to. But you can hire great, as Ryan said, you can hire great editors. So for Choose Yourself, I decided, you know what? I am not going to do the standard bullshit self-publishing. And that's what my course is about, is like how to professionally self-publish. So your book, you become a one-man publishing company. Now that doesn't mean a lot of extra work. It just means you make sure this book, nobody could tell no one's ever going to ask you, well, hey, who published your book? They either read it or they don't. But they will notice if you didn't do it professionally. They will notice that the cover was not done professionally. They will notice the interior design was not done professionally. They will notice if you didn't have a line editor, which means grammar. And they will notice if you didn't have a content editor, which means helping you structure the chapters and ask you questions about, that are critical to the arc of the book. So for Choose Yourself, Ryan Ryan and Tucker Max introduced me to Niels Parker, who was an excellent editor. I don't know if he's still doing editing, but there are a lot of great editors out there, and and there are a lot of great cover designers and interior designers, and I would definitely encourage, really, if you care about the topic, really do it professionally. And I just want to mention on the subject of medicine, just this one process made me think, and this is related to you saying you got mono. Nobody ever looks at, why do I have, they say, okay, here, you have a cough or you have pneumonia, here's medicine for it. There's a reason I have like a bad cough right now, is I was probably working too hard on something, or some stress was happening to me. So it's the real medicine is like thinking about what happened. Not that everyone's a victim, but because there's an opportunity there for victimizing yourself. But I was probably a month ago working too hard on something or being stressed out. Right. All right. I'll stop writing the Choose Yourself Guide to Health, and I'll let you write it.
All right. Are we gonna take one more question?
And I'll just say, after this question, it's not that the show's over. Take a networking break, get to know each other, step outside, smoke a cigarette against the doctor's orders, and then comedy show starts at 8:00. It's gonna be awesome. We've organized a really great lineup, and I'm emceeing. Plus, I might do an occasional joke, but we'll see. And that starts at 8:00 on the dot. It's about 7:25 now. But next question. Jay.
All right, one more question.
Jay, you have the power.
Yeah, I know.
This is like Lord of the Rings, and that's the ring.
A question for James. You've spoken about your idea pads, right? So is this something you're still doing, or you were just before?
Yeah.
But that's not my question.
So the thing she asked about is, starting around 2002, I started writing. I walked into a restaurant supply store on Bowery and Houston, and I bought like this box of 100 waiters pads for $10. And every day I would write down 10 ideas a day. And there would be ideas for businesses, ideas for books, ideas for someone else. Like I would write ideas to Amazon about self-publishing. And the result was Amazon asked me to fly out to Seattle, and they gave me a tour of all their self-publishing divisions, and I wrote 10 ideas for LinkedIn. I flew out to LinkedIn, and it's created a lot of exciting opportunities for me, and I do this every day. So today, for instance, on my waiter's pad, and I did this at the challenge of, I think, someone who's in the audience, but I wrote 10 ideas for master classes that I could teach. So the person who suggested this list idea for me, he threw out I should put in cooking as a good masterclass, and I said I have cooked once since I was 22, and it was on Valentine's Day, and I had just moved into this apartment after living in Airbnbs for 2.5 years, and I didn't realize that the previous person who lived there a year earlier had left this giant puddle of grease in the oven. So I put the salmon in the oven, turn it on, and it blows up on like Valentine's Day. So there's like fire and smoke like coming out of my apartment. And, my girlfriend was like, what is going on here? Like, you're supposed to be cooking dinner. And my neighbor said, why don't you guys come over and cook in the oven I have? Like, sorry this happened to you. But I felt a little weird about that, like going to some guy's apartment on Valentine's Day with my girlfriend and using his oven. I don't know, something seemed weirdly sexually off. I don't know. But yeah, so I do the list of, that was a tangent. I do this list of 10 ideas every day because, again, the idea muscle atrophies if you don't use it. And people say ideas are a dime a dozen. That's a fine cliche, but it's still really hard. You have to have a strong working idea muscle to come up with one good idea.
Yeah.
And execution is everything, but execution ideas are lists of ideas.
And that's what I was going to say. It was like, to ideate, that I'm good at, but in retrospect now, how do you feel like which of how do you come to the decision of what ideas to actually execute on?
Very few. Again, the purpose of writing the 10 ideas is solely to exercise the idea muscle, so that because you're not going to come up with 3,650 good ideas a year, you're going to come up with one. And often I'll come up with an idea, like I came up with this idea a few months ago, and my list of ideas was what would be good apps, and I had this idea for an app that I thought was a decent idea. It was called the Going Steady app. That's what I was calling it. And what it does is you and your boyfriend, once you decide, I'm talking about you specifically, once you decide to go steady, which is like this high school term, but now we can bring it into the social media age. You both install the Going Steady app, you link to each other, and it wipes out all your other dating apps, and it informs the other person of any change relating to dating on your phone. And so I thought that was a decent idea. So the very next day, I come up with 10 simple execution ideas. Like, here's what the home screen would look like. Here's what would happen what would it look like when you sign up. Here's what the apps are that I would be on the lookout for. And then I'm going to try freelancer.com or Fiverr. I'm going to spec out the app, which is it took like a paragraph or two, and I'm going to post. So that whole process of execution ideas and actually posting on freelancer.com to find a programmer took me about 10 minutes. And I got like 100 responses. And the one question I had can both an Android and an iPhone see what other apps are on the phone? That's the critical thing. You have to be able to see if Tinder is on the phone from the Going Steady app. And I guess iPhone can, but Android can't. So what I thought was a good idea instantly became a zero idea, but the whole process took me 10 minutes, and I test out.
Did you have a name?
Yeah, the Going Steady app. Yeah. And the whole idea, though, I test out like dozens of ideas like that every year. I did one the other day, but I have early onset Alzheimer's, and I can't remember what it is. And it had the same problem. Oh, I wanted an app that people don't send email anymore. It was just really frustrating to me. Someone says, oh, I sent you a message. Why didn't you respond? And it's like, did you send me a text message, an Instagram message, a LinkedIn message, a Facebook message, a Snapchat message, an email? So I wanted to find one platform to collect all my messages, and such a thing doesn't exist. But it turns out there's reasons why such a thing doesn't exist, because it's hard for every phone to send text messages. Anyway, it's hard for software to read your text messages and so on. And Instagram doesn't release your messages either in their application programming interface. But anyway, I test out lots of ideas by coming up with lists of execution ideas. So anyway, thank you all very much. Thank you, Ryan. I just want to say, Ryan, day one, this is the 5th year anniversary of publishing Choose Yourself. Ryan was there from the beginning. It was an amazing journey, and we got to know each other real well. Plus, he was the first producer of this podcast, so he also helped me launch this podcast, and we've been friends for a long time, so it's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
And don't forget, at 8 o'clock, come back. It's going to be a great comedy show, and your ticket covers the comedy show. Don't let them charge you again.
And at 9:15, there's a dessert.
And at 9:15, there's a flambe being cooked in our Wolfgang Puck is back downstairs in the kitchen, cooking an excellent flambe dessert. See, my voice is cracking. And stick around for the 9:15 dessert. So thanks very much.
Hey, thank you for listening to the James Altucher Show on YouTube today. I have a really special brand new episode coming out next week, but you can watch it early. Just click on the link right here or subscribe to the channel when you click on my face. And one more thing, don't forget to click the bell. I'll see you next time.